Hi, everyone. Is this working? Yeah? Okay. Thank you to all the presentations in the first panel. I think we'll continue sort of trying to think about some of the questions that were already raised. This panel, I think, is grouped under the heading of power. So I just wanted to speak to what Keg already started speaking about, this idea of the power in relation to archives, which happens or is manifested on lots of different levels. What will enter the archive, what is excluded from the archive, also who is allowed to get into the archive, who is not allowed to get into the archive. So there's a lot of sort of gatekeeping, and there's a lot of power involved in that. There's also power in how archives are organized and how they are narrated. What has been interesting to me for quite a long time as an artist is thinking about archives not just as things that happen in a building that is called an archive and that contains shelves and boxes and documents, but actually thinking of the archival or the archive as a much broader term, as something that we find in the world, that we find embedded in material, in architecture, in things. So trying to think about alternative archives, essentially. And I call these archives latent archives. And their latency means that they need to be discovered. They need to be recognized as such. And the way to describe this idea of latency, perhaps the easiest way, is to think about the kind of traditional analog film material, where you have a camera which uses a light-sensitive film that is exposed, and it captures an image. But that image is not visible yet. It's latent. It's already embedded, inscribed in the film, but you can't see it. It needs to be processed. It needs to be activated. And I suppose this process of activation is something that is also interesting to me. So the archive that I was interested in is the archive of mangoes of Goa, which we don't think of as an archive, of course. They're just mangoes growing on trees, and we love certain varieties. But actually, if we start to put the mangoes together that exist from Goa, there is over 70 varieties. And so if we start to think about them as an archive, they talk about a specific history. They also talk about a specific history of power. They talk about a colonial history. They talk about this moment in the 16th century when the Portuguese arrived here and would find fruit and plants which they liked. And the mango was one of the plants that became an absolute favorite, as is already testified in the first publication on medicinal plants and also food plants of Goa that was written in 1563 by Sephardic Portuguese physician who arrived here, Garcia de Horta, who you probably know because there is a garden just around the corner named after him. And he started to collect information about plants, about their uses. He was a pioneer of ethnobotany in a sense. And he was also interested in translation, and he had a lot of informants who worked at the Muslim courts, who were traders, who would bring information from various parts. So he was very much part of this kind of cosmopolitan moment in the 16th century where trade, where information was traded. And he already said the mango is the king of all the fruits here in Goa. And it is well known that with the Portuguese arrival, they also brought certain technologies that would meet with local agricultural production. And this included grafting, and grafting basically allowed for new stable varieties of mango to be produced. It's a kind of early form of cloning where you basically create a tree or a variety and you can keep it going. Because if the tree just mixes naturally, like female, male, you get basically a mix and you get mangoes that will change or future trees that will be different. But if you want to have a variety that stays the same, you need to keep it stable in some way. So what happened was the Portuguese recognized this amazing fruit, and it was part of this moment of the spice trade, of plants being very much important to the kind of economy of the colonial project, of the European colonial project, I should say, and of a kind of also extraction of wealth through agriculture, through local products that would then be distributed all over the world. So new varieties of mango would be produced more and more. So we see here one of the most famous ones, the Afonso. We can continue. Araújo, Barreto, and so on, Carreira. And you can see all of these have Portuguese names. So what we have here is a very specific archive. We have an archive of Goan mangoes, but they all bear Portuguese names. So this talks to this specific moment, this colonial moment of a language that is imposed, an economy that kind of takes place here. And so what we find is what is essentially has become a monocultural archive of a single language, which also testifies obviously to the power structures at the time, the people who had the means, the land, to commission new mangoes, to create new varieties. I mean, Afonso, the first one, is named after Afonso de Albuquerque. So what I did was trying to intervene in this archive, because this is also what we can do. In these latent archives, the meaning is not completely fixed, or at least we can intervene and we can confront these archives. So what I wanted to do with this work is to produce an alphabet. So each of the mangoes starts with a different letter of the alphabet. And each of the mangoes is superimposed with the first letter of its name, its Portuguese name, but in a different language, in a different script. And these would be the languages that were part of this 16th century cosmopolitan moment of Goa and the world around it. So starting the first one with Hebrew, Arabic, Devanagari, Kannada, Malayalam, also obviously the scripts that I used for Konkani, also Farsi, Sinhala, Tamil, Urdu, Nepali, Gujarati, Marathi, Oriya, and so forth. So 20 different languages, 20 different scripts, to reintroduce a linguistic diversity, a cultural diversity, to say, look, okay, we have these mangoes, there is an archive here, and it's obviously a specific archive, a colonial archive, a monocultural archive. We can re-diversify it. We can speak again about this moment of when these mangoes emerged, and how these mangoes live also today, of course, in a much more diverse world or context. So, yeah, we can just go through. And of course, I mean, what I found as an artist is that once you take letters of a script out of context, you begin to see it as an aesthetic form, and you see the beauty of these letters of all these different scripts. So the last one is the Latin script. It ends with X, and you basically see these different scripts and this variety, and it implies also the diversity of knowledge that lies behind. Obviously, scripts are recording systems. Scripts themselves are a way to create archives and record knowledge. And so it introduces this kind of, a sort of a cosmology of knowledges rather than knowledge in the singular. I think maybe I'll leave it there. I'm showing another piece in the exhibition, but I will just say 2 words about it. It's basically a conversation between the 2 gardens named after Garcia de Horta, the garden in Panjim here and the garden in Lisbon. And it's a kind of reimagination of the book, or the significance of the book, which was written in dialogue form. And it's a short kind of conversation between Garcia de Horta, an imagined conversation between Garcia de Horta and a man from the street, Ruano, which is also the interlocutor of the book, or in the book. Yeah, and if you have time, I invite you to see it in the exhibition. Thank you.